be talking to Back to the Future again today, but this time I have read the Ultimate Visual History of Back to the Future, so I'm going to be telling some tidbits of information you may have heard before, and also kind of throwing things that you're not going to read on the IMDb page, which is what most of these videos do, which is kind of annoying. But anyway, so I'm going to take these off because they're reflecting. Obviously, Bob Gale wrote it with Robert Zemeckis, and they are just the creative heads of Back to the Future. And I do appreciate that they will never allow Back to the Future to be remade. Their stories have continued in comic books, which I have all of back here, and they've also continued in video games and in animated shows. So it's not to say their story hasn't continued, there just won't be another film, and I don't think that there should be. So that having been said, here are some fun, interesting things that I read that I didn't know about. That some of these things might be on IMDb, but a lot won't be. So 3 DeLoreans were used for a total cost of $58,000, and the license plate, of course, reads "at a time." If you don't know, this I already knew, and I did the math myself. So the clock on the clock tower began September 5th, 1885 at 8 p.m., and it stopped when it was struck by lightning November 12th, 1955 at 10:04 p.m., which means, if my math is correct, it ran for 70 years, 2 months, 7 days, 2 hours, and 4 minutes, unsure on seconds, as it doesn't have a second handpiece. Michael J. Fox, of course, plays Marty McFly. He did this while he was filming Family Ties, playing the character of Alex P. Keaton, for which he was actually very, very well known and famous for at the time. He was already a teen idol. And at the time, the woman who played his on-screen mother was pregnant, so his role was actually expanded, and then it was delayed, and while it was delayed, he filmed the movie Teen Wolf. And then he didn't end up getting hired to do Back to the Future until after she had given birth, but we will get into that with the Eric Schultz of it all. For Doc, when they went into casting, they were looking at a lot of different people from like John Lithgow, Christopher Lloyd, Jeff Goldblum, essentially everybody who was in Buckaroo Banzai, which is why I have my red Buckaroo Banzai glasses. Wow, I'm a nerd. They cast Claudia Wells to play Jennifer in the first film, but of course in the second and third film she's played by Elizabeth Shue, and I'll get into more on that in a few minutes. And then for the role of Biff, they cast Tom Wilson, and he actually contributed. I didn't realize how much of the character he contributed to the film. It's actually pretty amazing and very awesome. So of course the first Marty was Eric Schultz, and he filmed for the first 6 weeks, but he was hired for the first 7 weeks. They fired him in the 7th week, but they already knew they were going to fire him, and they had already hired Michael J. Fox in the 7th week. So in the original script, they actually had Doc and Marty using an atom bomb to get the DeLorean to power up and take him back to 1985. And so they ended up having to scrap that and to film it on the back lot using the famous, clock tower and lightning scene. So it was actually kind of a good thing that Eric Schultz wasn't in the movie, because oh man, can you imagine? It just would not have been as good. But further, they actually maybe ended up saving money, because all the effects and stuff needed to do the atom bomb stuff was going to be really expensive. So having to redo those 7 weeks worth of filming might have actually been a saving grace, not only for getting Michael J. Fox into the part that he was born to play and is probably most famous for, but also giving us a way better concise story and the clock tower. Let's see what else. They were talking about the logos, and the reasons that they used certain logos is they wanted to use logos that had changed from 1955 to 1985, that way that they looked older. So that's why they used Texaco versus something like Shell, and Pepsi versus Coke, because their logos had been altered through the years. Although I feel like Coke's has, from now anyway, when Eric Schultz was hired, he apparently is a method actor, so he wanted everyone on set to call him Marty, and he would only respond to Marty. I really hate method actors. Anyway, when they fired him, when they told Christopher Lloyd, apparently he didn't know who Eric was, so they had to say, Marty. Apparently he thought that his name was actually Marty, and they just, on a coincidence, hired someone whose name was Marty to play Marty, which is the most Christopher Lloyd thing ever. That's so funny. Oh my gosh. And also Christopher Lloyd, he had made Clue the same year. Isn't that amazing? Clue and Back to the Future. But I think that was only 2 years after Taxi went off the air. So if you look at like Taxi Christopher Lloyd versus Back to the Future Christopher Lloyd, while he's playing such different parts, he's always playing that kind of high energy character. So it's kind of fun to see how much of a transformation that because I always thought as a kid, like, that's just what he looked like. I didn't realize he underwent this transformation. And his character is supposed to be 65 years old. I didn't know that either. So that means when they go back to 1955, Doc is only 35. Ooh, Doc. In the Daily Variety, after that they fired Eric Stoltz, they had written an article like, Back to the Future seems highly problematic, and which is something that would very much be, can you imagine, like, if you imagine, like, if they fired someone 6 weeks into production, your main character, how much that would be all over Twitter, and everyone's like, oh, this movie's gonna be terrible. Like, they do that with directors now, if you look at, like, the various directors that have been fired from films in recent years into production, like with Solo and with Bohemian Rhapsody. Let's see. Ooh, Dr. Emmett Lathrop Brown. If you spell Emmett Lathrop backwards, it looks like it spells time portal. That's just a random coincidence that was unintentional. It wasn't in the book. That was just something that I knew that I thought was fun. There's a clock in the beginning of the film when they're panning through that has someone hanging. I'm just going to put a picture of it. I don't know why I'm explaining what it looks like. Oh my gosh. I didn't even realize I had this back here. I'm such a nerd. Anyway, you see someone hanging from a clock. That's from a film back in Ye Olden Times with Harold Lloyd. A lot of people think it's Charlie Chaplin. It's not. It's Harold Lloyd. So as you know, no relation to Christopher Lloyd, but a fun fact. So that's what that picture is there for. Let's see. Crispin Glover was apparently very difficult to work with on the first film, and he wasn't as bad as Schultz with the method acting, but he was like deliberately making things difficult for the filmmakers, and so they did ask him back for the second film, but obviously he did not come back for the second film. That is a different actor. I believe his name is Jeffrey Weissman. And they used the prosthetics that Crispin Glover had used in the first film to essentially put a mask of Crispin Glover's face on this other actor, which Crispin Glover sued them over, rightfully so. It ended up being settled and not going to court. But particularly nowadays with, like, not necessarily deep fakes, but with all the CGI and the capabilities that we have being able to do today, I do think it is very important that the Actors Guild, have a lot of rules and regulations regarding this as new technology arises and as new technology has arisen, because an actor really their image should not be portrayed in film unless they have given their consent to having it done so. So I fully agree with his lawsuit, and further, you can tell they were being purposefully nefarious with it, as Jennifer also, again, switched characters, and they didn't use any kind of prosthetics to make Elizabeth Shue look like the previous actress. So they did that just to the character playing Crispin Glover's part, and they constantly were making jokes, and they were even referring to the actor as Crispin, which I feel like would be very awkward for that actor. Like, that's just kind of not a nice thing to do. So yeah, that kind of sucks for him. And so I do stand by Crispin Glover's lawsuit. For those who are aware of Bela Lugosi, his son was a lawyer, kind of well known, and he did some similar lawsuits regarding that back in the day because his father's image was so circulated without being paid for, which was really different from like Boris Karloff as Frankenstein or Lon Chaney Jr. as the Wolfman, as Bela Lugosi. It's his actual face with no kind of prosthetics. And they were using it kind of free range without his permission, which, yeah, that's kind of messed up, particularly with, how Bela Lugosi's life ended. Yeah. I'm getting off on a tangent. I do think this is a film series that has, the most musical guest stars, because in the first film, they obviously have Huey Lewis. He's the guy who comes from the bullhorn who says, "I'm afraid you're just too dumb and loud." And then, the character Needles, particularly in Back to the Future 3, is featured most prominently. He's played by Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And then, of course, Back to the Future 3 features ZZ Top, because I think it was Bob Zemeckis thought their beards were cool since they were real, and it fit in very well with the Western look that the third film is. And they did that purely, they did a Western in the third film purely because Robert Zemeckis really likes Westerns, which I think is kind of endearing. Let's see. When it opened, it did really well. It had a really wide release with 1,420 theaters in its, I think, second week. And it made $11 million, which doesn't sound good, but for 1985 money, sure was. And it was number one for, like, I think 9 weeks. In terms of movies with the longest running weeks at number one, Back to the Future is high up there as one of the longest movies to have the number one week. So it not only made a lot of money, but in terms of, 1985, it was definitely one of the highest, I think it was the highest grossing movie of the year. And rightfully so. Back to the Future is such a good movie. And, I mean, there were a lot of good movies in 1985. Had a lot of competition, but I defend Back to the Future. And I'm happy that, it did so well. Despite the fact that, okay, Steve and Robin, yes. It's a little messed up. So then we get into Back to the Future 2, which they knew they didn't know originally they wanted to do a sequel, so they left it obviously open for one, although that ended up being kind of a hindrance with the they knew they had to go into the future because that's where they left off, but then it's like, why would you go to the future? So they had to kind of be creative with that, and they wrote this really crazy, wild script that was going all over the place, including 1967, which is obviously not in the end of the film. Or they did not get into the original film, and they ended up doing so many time hops that they just decided to make it 2 films instead of 1, and to film them back to back, which I think was really smart. But at the time, Zemeckis had gone off to do Who Framed Roger Rabbit with Christopher Lloyd, so they ended up putting it on the back burner until he was finished with that. So these movies ended up coming out 4 and 5 years after the original one in 1989 and 1990. Which seems like so much longer, but it really isn't. But also it is. So they had called the Biff 1985 Biff Horrific, which I love. I don't know why. It just sounds so fun. So they had the Biff Horrific 1985, and obviously there were some cast change ups for better or worse, and there were a lot of instances where they had to film actors interacting with themselves. So they create, or ILM, which is ILM, which is Industrial Light and Magic, which used to be owned by Lucasfilm, which is where Pixar came from, actually. They developed this thing called the VistaGlide, which allows the actors to interact with themselves by the way the camera works. So the dinner scene, I think, is especially interesting because it has old Marty, it has Marty Jr., and it has Marlene, who are all portrayed by Michael J. Fox. So that had one actor being 3 people in one scene in 1985, which was very, very impressive at the time, which, honestly, considering the age I grew up in with so much CGI, I never realized, like, they had to create an entirely new way to film that scene to do it, which is so interesting. And the hoverboard thing was actually kind of difficult. This one girl almost ended up getting paralyzed in an accident that they had with them, which is so sad. She's fine, but that's just kind of sad. Oh, something I don't know if a lot of people know is that the Biff's crew, their names are Match, 3D, and Skinhead, but that's in the 1955 era. Not a lot of, like, really interesting things with Back to the Future 2, just kind of fun stuff like that. And then the third one, even less interesting things. I love the Western Union letter. That's just kind of random. And I already mentioned ZZ Top. And I like in this one that Doc kind of becomes the leading man and, like, a romantic lead and a vamp. And, I guess the Michael J. Fox almost hung himself, but that's pretty widely known. But what happened was they wanted to actually show him hanging because they were doing a long shot, and so he put his hands here to stop the rope from choking him, but because of the pressure caused his hands to press on his jugular, and so he passed out for 10 seconds before they revived him. I don't know how they drug him, like, with the horse and the rope being pulled. I don't know how they did that. That looks like that would have been the more dangerous thing to do. So just remember, kids, filming things is dangerous works. Anyways, that's a bunch of fun random things that I learned from reading the Ultimate Visual History of the Making Back to the Future. I love Back to the Future. I'm kind of a nerd about it. Don't know if you could tell. Anyway, have a great day. We need a Moon Knight movie, and bye.